Okay.
शुरू हो गया yeah, okay.
Okay. So let me see how many people are there. Just 15 people are there.
Some
Okay.
people
Anyway,
already have
so I think that, yeah. So 12 the participants and 3 from IGNOU side. Okay. So good afternoon, dear participants, dear learners. That today's session we will discuss about application of remote sensing and GIS in environmental studies. So the other day on 25th we had a session that in that we discussed about the basics of the remote sensing and GIS. So today we will go on to the application part of these two technologies. So now the this presentation is I have tried to make it in this way that I will start with a brief giving big background of this technologies, and then I will just discuss about the natural resource management, how this is useful in this past, and how the geoinformatics is useful in the land use land cover mapping and monitoring. Then in most of the land natural resources, the land part is there. So here we see how the landform is mapped and how that is important for a lot of application areas. So I'm not trying to categorize into land, water, and air, but here I will just give you initially with LULC, the land use land cover, and then I'll discuss about some of the landforms and how those are useful for deriving a number of information. And at the last, I have got two slides on climate change, how remote sensing and GIS is useful for understanding the climate change. So I think when we learn about the land use land cover and the relevant aspects under the landform, I am covering a lot of parameters right from say different kinds of landforms, land degradation, and then groundwater. Also, I am discussing under that topic only. And then after that, I will be discussing about biodiversity, habitat change, and many other relevant aspects. And also in that, I will discuss about the uh, special decision support system. So I just try to give an overview, then I'll start with that. So this is how it is that this remote sensing and GIS are particularly useful for mapping our environment. And the most commonly things that we do are the land use land cover mapping, and particularly in the say ecosystem point of view, we go for habitat mapping. So one is that to map the environment. Then once we have mapped the environment for one given date, given data, then in that case we try to prepare maps of different time periods and see how the conditions have changed with time. So some of the common examples are the land use land cover change and the forest cover and density and the shoreline change, how it is done. So I'll be giving some more of a picture in this. I'll be showing you some pictures, some outputs of this. And then another aspect is the environmental impact assessment. So I don't have a direct slide on this, but there are many things in that it will be covered. So then another important thing is the site suitability analysis. This is one major part where the role of GIS comes into the picture. And then as you have in your self-learning material about the environmental information system. Those are basically either information system, or if it is used in for management decision-taking purpose, then it is called a spatial decision support system. So I'll have example of 2-3 case studies. Uh, I'll show that. So let us just before we go into the application part, we will just recap what we have learned in the previous session. We have understood about the remote sensing, that it is a science and art of obtaining useful information about object, area, and phenomena through the analysis of data that has been acquired by a device that is not in contact with the object, area, or phenomena that is under investigation. Now coming to the second component, that is the geographic information system. We know that it integrates hardware, software, and data, and that is useful for capturing, managing, analyzing, displaying, and all forms of geographically referenced information or geoinformation. and it helps us to visualize, understand, question, and interpret data in a ways that reveal relationship. That this is what the crux of GIS is. That it is useful for understanding the relationship, patterns, and trends, and also it is useful for uh, uh, putting up questions that could be we can try to find answer that. So the GIS it helps us to not only locate the areas like for example land use, land cover, etc. It also we can through this we can also identify the infrastructure. I'm talking here particularly about the urban infrastructure when I can say that it is about water and sewer pipes, etc. That could be mapped and located in a map. And as we discussed the other day, that this GIS is not just about the map, but the maps, the line points and polygons or whatever features are there in those maps, they have data behind them. So there is a lot of non-spatial data that is with attached with those features. And when we combine the different maps, we combine data to get the information that we want. So this is another important aspect of that. And another important thing is that is the crux of this is that we can the GS allows us ask we are the questions to be asked. It allows questions to be asked from the map or the database site. The third component was GNSS, that is Global Navigation Satellite System, and we know that it is a constellation of Earth orbiting satellites that provides us autonomous geospatial positioning. So this is what it is useful for. Now we know that all these three components are the component of the technology that we call as geoinformatics. So there are many more things into that, but we consider these three as the primary components. So and we have learned that the advantage of geoinformatics is that it is relevant wherever the spatial data is concerned, and from the remote sensing point of view, it is a means of rapid and periodic data collection. And from a GIS point of view, it helps us to create and visualize. And if that is how it is useful for spatial data management, and that is why it is useful for planning and management for many different application areas. Now these are the some of the application areas that we discussed. So here we will be covering many of these application areas and then we'll see. But the three component that we discussed, remote sensing, GIS, and GNSS, out of these three, the remote sensing and the GNSS are the technologies that are considered as the data acquisition technology, because from remote sensing you get an image, and from GNSS, from GPS, you get location, etc. You will be getting. Whereas the GIS is the platform in which one can bring the data which has been acquired from remote sensing and also from GNSS, and we can do some analysis on the GIS platform, GIS environment. So that is how the distinction between these three components are. Now we have learned that the what we can do with this is that we can map the features from an image, we can measure the parameters from them, and we can also use it for monitoring purpose. So these three are basically and we can elaborate further that when we talk about mapping, we talk about the identification of features and their delineation in some form, and that is how we can create maps. And once we have the map for one season or one date, we can create maps of other data also, and then we can do a historical data analysis, and that is how we can understand what is the change which is going on, what is the pattern of change, what is the trend, and then we can probably suggest what would be the, the protective measures or what measures could be taken in future. So, as per the Jensen in 1993, he told that there are many parameters that could be derived from remote sensing data. And in short, I can say that there are basically location, elevation, characteristics of various features, vegetation, soil, water, etc. And also temperature is another parameter that could be affected. But all these parameters are there in the images, and that needs to be extracted by the image analyst from those images. This is important. Now, when we talk about environment is a big topic where it covers almost everything we can see around. And so, to understand the dynamics of land, ocean, and atmospheric parameters over time and space, we need to first map them, these parameters, these features, and then we should be able to, or we should be doing the continuous monitoring that is required at different temporal and the spatial scale. So that is important here, that to be able to monitor something, we need to map them first, and then we should be having a continuous monitoring at different temporal and spatial scale. However, uh, if we want to monitor them, we should be able to monitor them only when these parameters are identifiable by us in the images. And so that this Earth surface and probably and also some subsurface features also, and oceanic atmospheric features can be identified based on their characteristic spectral signature in different spectral ranges. Now you may recall that the other day we were discussing about three major features. That was vegetation, soil, and water. We discussed about the spectral signature of these three features. This is important because unless we are able to identify those features, we will not be able to map them. So let us just have a recap of those three slides again. Then we can move on to the application part. So this is about the spectral signature of vegetation. So this is the spectral profile of vegetation in different wavelength, right from visible. This is green wavelength to infrared wavelength. So here you can say that uh, as we discussed the other day, that vegetation appears to us green because within the visible range, that is the limitation for our eyes. We cannot see beyond the visible range. So within the visible range, since the vegetation has a higher reflection in green wavelength, that is why the plant leaf appear green to us. Okay, but otherwise, sensors can be designed in such a way that they can capture the radiation even beyond the visible spectrum. So we can, but once it is captured, once the image has been captured, we can show these images, or we can visualize them in the computer system, and we can identify features from those images. So this is how, depending upon what is the chlorophyll content, what is the water content, what is the shape and size and thickness of the leaf. Depending upon that, it will contain the water, its moisture, then chlorophyll and mesophyll. Depending upon that, we can identify different kinds of vegetation, meaning that we can identify different kinds of vegetation species, the forest types, etc. Now, the second feature, the commonly we study are the soil. This is how it is. Initially, it is less. Then, as we go to the higher wavelength, then the reflection increases, particularly for the dry soil. If it is wet, then again there will be a dip in the spectral signature at the higher wavelength. Water, we know that there is a exponential decay of a signal in the higher wavelength beyond the, and after a point in NIR, we don't see any signal coming out from the water. So this is important to remember. Now let us talk about the application part. We know that the remote sensing and GIS have revolutionized the way we plan and manage our natural and built environment, because it has made it possible to collect, analyze, and visualize large quantities of spatial data. And that has been useful particularly for the decision makers to get valuable insights into the requirements, and also to help planners, engineers, and officials to make a decision based on this kind of data sets. And some examples we can say is, particularly in the case of spatial planning in, say, urban planning, uh, it is mostly used by the city governments and planning agencies and development practitioners to address a variety of problems like land stability analysis and feasibility studies, environmental conservation, public health mapping, etc. So there are this. I'm just trying to put it in this, but there are a number of things that could be where this could be utilized. Now, Another important thing is that we can do the mapping monitoring, but unless the mapping and monitoring is done in a sufficient detail that is required for the purpose that we are going to study or that we are studying, uh, it will not be useful. So it should be in a scale that is required to study those features. So for that purpose, the consideration of data is very important, or rather it is critical in terms of that the details that is possible to expect from the given remote sensing data, the interval that is sufficient for data acquisition, and uh, of course, if it will be better that the data which we have been acquired, that we have acquired is the same area and preferably by the same sensor, because if the sensor changes, of course, because the life of the sensor is satellite is not much beyond a year, some years, then there are nowadays these space agencies launch satellites that provide continuous data sets. Of course, the sensor will be different, means sensor could be same, but again it would be a newly launched satellite. So there is a continuity of data, like Landscape series of sensor satellites have been launched, and we have a series of data of flight from 1979 to the present. And also the timing of data acquisition is very important for that we are studying. Suppose we want to study the say if I take example of coastal areas. Suppose I want to know the coral reef areas I want to map. So for that I need to get a data that coincides with the low tide condition, because if there is a high tide, there will be a lot of water about the coral reefs features. So that the column of water that is present over those features will hinder my analysis or my extraction of the feature that I am interested in. So that is particular in the case of coastal. And also we need to be careful if I want to study the crop pattern. So it should be coinciding with the season that in that the crop grows. If I want to study the Rabi crop, I should be studying the data that is taken only in the Rabi season. That is the example of this. Now, if I talk about the natural resource management, there are many studies that have been possible, but here I'll just list few things here. Of course, there will be some overlapping of the application, but just to give a list here. First, the identification of degraded land is another common example wherein this is used. Then mineral resources, mineral zones, then the different kinds of rock types, lithological studies, water resources mapping, then quality of water, mapping them and monitoring the quality over time. That is also the common kind of case study that is done. And for the underground water, the areas where we can find the potential areas for the groundwater zones, that are also another common example of this. Then soil resource mapping is another example, common example of this for natural resource management. So we will see out some of the applications, some of the examples we'll see in the later slides. So out of this, the major things are into the land use, land cover, and mapping, and geomorphology, and land degradation. So I have arranged my slides like this. I will start with land use, land cover mapping, and under the geomorphology, I am including the land degradation, etc. Habitat mapping, bathymetry, etc. I am using under that. So we'll start with the land use, land cover. Land use and land cover, there are two different terms. Land use, it refers to the uses of land by human beings, such as for the purpose of houses, roads, manufacturing plants, etc. And the land cover refers to the natural landscape, that is the surface component of a portion of the Earth's surface, like forest, lake, beach, rivers, etc. So here you will understand that the land use here designates the economic activity, and hence it is abstract, whereas the land cover designates the surface features and is therefore directly observable. Just to summarize, the land use are basically the use of land, if we can understand by that. Wherever the land is used by human, then those features are land use features, and wherever there is a natural cover of the land, that are the land cover features. So remote sensing in GIS is particularly useful in monitoring land use, land cover, and its changes through time over a variety of spatial scales. So this is the most common applications of remote sensing in GIS, the land use, land cover mapping. But when we want to map land use, land cover, there are different classes that needs to be mapped. So there is a standard classification system that has been given by National Remote Sensing Agency. Now it has been renamed as National Remote Sensing Center. So they have given it, I'm just putting only 3 classes here, but there are level 1, level 2, level 3. So as the level increases, the detail of the process increases, the information increases. Like say, if I just want to make level 1 mapping, I'll be just taking one class that will be built up. Under that, there will be many different classes. But if I want to go for level 2, I can go further into whether it is a town, whether it is a city or village, etc. If I want to go to level 3, I can further categorize into different classes under that. Similarly, for agricultural land, when I want to go for level 3 mapping, then I need to map different features within that, Kharif, Rabi, or Kharif plus Rabi, or Zayad, whatever. So like that, as the level increases, the detail of the mapping increases. Now this was the example of level 3. Now again, when we come to the built-up, there are further different examples, like if I just take whether it is a residential or urban or rural, and then again further take it whether it is a in the case of urban, whether it is a single family unit, multi-family unit, others, etc. So all those kinds of features are identified. But now you should remember that to map features at a certain level, certain detail, you need to choose a data that gives information at that particular level. So that is important to understand. Now we know that when we talk about land use, land cover, you see that there are a lot of millions of people move towards the urban areas for better prospects in terms of employment, education, etc. So there is a large scale movement of migration of people from the rural areas to the urban areas, and this migration requires a lot of infrastructures to be developed in the urban areas. So for that, there is an estimate that there is a requirement of accommodating about 10 million urban dwellers per year, and if they come to the urban areas, then there should be a planned activities for water supply, sewerage, drainage, solid waste management, urban transportation, and also addressing the slums and their need, and also to create opportunities for economic growth. So all those things are required when we talk about particularly urban planning, if you say. But it is also required that at the same time, one should ensure, the planners should ensure that this urbanization is environmentally sustainable. That is the challenge what our urban planners face. So if I take few examples here, the GIS and the use of GIS in the infrastructure management, I just took the example of land use, land cover that we saw. Then we need to study the urban sprawl, that how the urban areas are increasing, in which area direction, how it is increasing. So that is called urban sprawl. Then for that we need to make some planning. So if suppose this is the urban sprawl at this particular point of time, then maybe after 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. So what could be the scenario after 50 years or 100 years? If this is at the present rate of growth of the cities is there. So that is how the urban planners try to visualize things or project the scenario in future. And for that they use GIS in a much more effective way. Then besides the infrastructure part, there are within the infrastructure, then the network planning is required, like electricity, transportation, water supply, sewer, drainage, all those are required because a lot of people will be coming, so this all facilities will be required. Then, of course, there is also requirement for planning for housing, business, revenue, health, and education, and in terms of retail business, and for tax, hospital, schools, etc. So, a lot of things are needed to be considered while uh, making plan for urban areas or even for any other areas. So now coming to that, we will have some examples in between, but let us start with the second part, that is the landform mapping. I'll be covering many of the things, examples under this part. So landform mapping is important because it gives us an idea about what are the processes are which are active on the Earth's surface, how the landscape has evolved with time, and what is the land use planning, soil modeling and forest management, management of geological hazards and natural resources, ecological studies, archaeological studies. There are many things that could be covered under the land, where the landform is useful. So now, whenever we go for this mapping, we need to identify, as we discussed earlier, we need to identify those features and map and create a map. So this interpretation is from the aerial photograph either or from the remote sensing images. Now this is one example where the landform mapping has been done, and this map I have forgotten to mention the source here. This is a map by Dr. Amitkumar, who prepared this map. The landform mapping, we know that it is a process that involves partitioning of the terrain into different units based on certain criteria that involves form, process, and composition, association, spatial arrangement, etc. So while we are mapping the landforms, these things are considered while mapping the features. So this is a map of a part of Himachal Pradesh, wherein a Banner river watershed was mapped, that is in Kangra, and different landforms were mapped in this. And particularly, this is remote sensing data is useful for mapping and monitoring the different kinds of landforms and drainage network. We'll see some examples here. And when we talk about landform mapping, not only the landforms, different kinds in different terrains, but also the processes that is there that we can also understand through that. And another example common is bathymetry, but this is more common for the coastal areas, not that much popular or not that easily done for the inland waters area. But we'll see that. So if I talk about the fluvial landforms, this is one image that gives you an idea about a river, and then this horseshoe kind of features are there. They are basically the water bodies. We call it as a horseshoe lake. These are meanders, and through the meanders, through the process, how it is moving with time, and how the river changes its course with time. These oxbow lakes, horseshoe lakes are formed. This is more common, particularly in the eastern part of that. So this is the main river, the bluish one, and then the dark one, the black one it is showing are the oxbow lake. Now, when we talk about the water, we can also talk about the groundwater. Here, this is one a map that shows the groundwater prospect maps for an area in Meghalaya, and all those areas have been categorized into 4 zones. That gives an idea about what is the groundwater prospect in this area. So this image was provided by Dr. Deshmukh in CDAC. And when we come to this, there are a number of thematic maps that have been used to derive to this map. The landforms, the map, then what is the geological structures, what are the rock types, soil type, etc. There are a number of factors that have been used to come to this the map. Then when we talk about the topography, you can see that this is one area in part of Karnataka in the Sandur cyst belt that is there. So this is these are the hills which is known for their manganese and iron mines. So when we can create a special profile, and when you see this is the line, and this is a profile from here to this point, this to this point. It gives you an idea what is the topography in this one. Now, when we can also create contours from the digital elevation model. This data is basically a digital elevation model that has been created from the SRTM satellite, and from this we can create profile, we can create contours, so we can also create drainage network from the digital elevation model. This is the elevation height it is showing from about 309 meter at the blue, at the highest is around 1030 meter. So if you want to understand the mining activities, what is the impact of that, how much mining, at what depth mining has been taken place, we can use this data for understanding, identifying the areas that have been excavated and where the waste material has been dumped. So this is a top view of an open cast mine in that one part in that Sandus belt. So this the top map, top right map gives you an idea about the areas. It gives you only red and blue. So red are the areas where the excavation has taken place, and blue is the area that gives you an idea about the areas where dumping has taken place. What happens is they will extract, they will mine, but all the things are not the iron or not the mineral which is of our interest. So there will be also be some overburden, some waste material will be there. So the waste material are dumped in some areas, some chosen areas, and the ores, the material that from there we can extract metals that is used for further ore beneficiation process. So this map gives you just an idea about the areas where the dumping and excavation has taken place. But we can also create when we have multiple digital elevation model. So we can use those to understand with time how much excavation has taken place, or at what height the dumping has taken place. So we can understand to what level the excavation has been done. This gives an idea about this is the surface, and then the red one gives you an idea that this is the maximum depth around 300 meter up to which the excavation has taken place. So this gives you one map gives you an idea about the areas, and the other map gives you an idea about to what level excavation has taken place or dumping has taken place. Now another common example is mineral resource mapping, or mapping potential zones where one can go for mining. So this is a very typical, a very simplified example. I can say that here. This is, say, parameter 1 and parameter B are there. We can understand that there are two parameters which are variable for finding a mineral, say a mineral Y. So we can, this is very simple thing. I just use two simplified maps to just suggest that the areas which are where these two parameter conditions are meeting, we can find the zones where we can recommend for mining. So this is the actual output, where again this is a part of Karnataka, where the mining the potential zone map is prepared here, and this shows the area where there are manganese and iron ore. There are also the areas where only manganese ore is present. So this is the map which is again given in that. Now coming to the another example, the land irrigation part. So this is this was a part of a project from ISRO and RS-GIS, and in that there is a nationwide mapping of land use and cover, land degradation, geomorphology, and many other parameters that are mapped periodically. I think every 5 years they are mapped for the entire India. So this map was prepared in around 2010, 9 and 10. So in that case, I was also part of this project wherein we did mapping of this land degradation of Bihar, entire Bihar state. So wherein the mapping of this land degradation process was done using different parameters, including the landforms and land use, and then also the chemical analysis of the degraded soils where it was there. And then I mentioned this is a part of NRC NR census project of Government of India under the ISRO. So this is called National Natural Resources Census. The census is carried out every 5 years. And this is another map which was prepared by Indian Space Research Organization. There is one center of that in Ahmedabad, that is Space Application Center. They prepared this map for different time period and showing different kinds of land degradation classes. This is the map which was prepared in 2016. And I forgot to mention that the map which was showed in the previous slide, those outputs are available now in the Bhuvan website, Bhuvan portal. Under the Bihar state, you can see the soil erosion, water erosion, and the soil affected, salt affected areas. Those different kinds of maps are available. Those maps are prepared by us. Now, coming on to the another kind of landform, that is glacier. We know that the glaciers are very important, not only as a source of water, but also that any change in the weather parameters or the climate, the glaciers are greatly affected. So there are many studies which are going on that that continuously map and monitor these glaciers. So this is one example where this remote sensing GIS techniques are very well used. Coming to the coastal zone, this is very typical here that earlier we discussed about the land, some examples, and then we discussed about underground also. I will have some more slides afterwards, but let us now come to here, the coastal part. In the coastal particularly, it is used for identifying the coastal zones and the boundaries. You might have heard about the coastal regulation zones. So that CRZ, there are 4 types of zones are there. Those zones are have been mapped using remote sensing data. So another example is the shoreline mapping, how there is erosion or deposition going on in some areas that is understood by mapping the shoreline of that particular area and monitoring them continuously. Then also if there is any change in the coastal ecosystems or habitats, whether any area is lost or any area is gained, that is revealed through monitoring of the coastal habitats. Then coastal processes are needed to be studied. So this is very well used in coastal processes. The one example is Ocean Set 1 and 2, which is typically used for coastal processes and study of those. And also there is one example is of bathymetry. So I'll have some example of that. Some slides I'm putting it here. You see that. This was in the context of coastal in general. But when we talk about ecosystem in particular, then again there will be some things common. But the quality of water and the sediment discharge and marine pollution, oil spill, etc., will be of much interest to the ecologists. And you also note that it is covered in your study material that potential fishing zone is one example given in that. So there also the remote sensing data is used for that, particularly the chlorophyll concentration and the temperature. So the thermal gradient and the availability of the nutrients, these two things are the important parameters for availability of finding a fish in some part of the ocean, coastal area. So this is the two parameters which are used to prepare a map of potential fishing zone, and those maps are prepared and given to put on some website, particularly this Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services, which is based at Hyderabad under the Ministry of Earth Sciences. They prepare these maps and they are put on the website, and the fishermen use these maps for catching the fish. So coming to the first example, that is the shoreline change map. We can give an example of this. That is when the tsunami struck in 2004 December. This map was prepared. The this was a condition before the tsunami and when the tsunami struck. So there were some changes that were identified. So we found that in one area of this island, this is Little Andaman Island in the Andaman Nicobar, we found in the western part there are a lot of change. Particularly the land has uplifted in those parts, and this part, many areas, they were submerged under the water. This is one example. And when we talk about the coral reef particularly, this is an image from Gulf of Kutch, wherein you see that I was mentioning about the importance of data. So this is the data during the low tide, this is the data during the mid tide, and this is the data during another almost high tide condition. So you see that to map the features, this intertidal features, we need to choose the data that is that suits the mapping of those features. So if you use this image for mapping this feature, then we will not be getting much information about this feature. So that is why the selection of data, the consideration of data is very much important. Now we were talking about the habitat mapping. So this is an example of habitat mapping of Kavaratti Island, which this map was prepared in around 2009 by two of my students when I was in CDEC. So this is in these are the islands in Lakshadweep, wherein the habitats were mapped, and different habitats like the coral and beaches, seagrasses, etc. Those were mapped in that. And this is the map that gives change within those 2 dates, how those change has taken place in those times. So this negative, positive, whether you can make any criteria, and then we can identify those pictures. Another example is the bathymetry. Again, these are the 2 different coral reefs in the Lakshadweep group of islands, wherein the bathymetry of this were extracted using the Jukes method, and this categorizes the depth into the 4 different zones. The zones which you see in the light color, they are much more deeper, and the darker one are the shallower part. This remote sensing GIS is also used for management zonation. So this is an example of that, wherein based on the habitat, land use, land cover, bathymetry, etc., different parameters, one can derive a map that could be useful for decision makers. So the decision makers or planners don't need maps which are intermediate scale. They might not be able to make much from the land use map or this or habitat map. But when we can give them something that is useful for them to understand them, then it would be much more useful. So this map shows 4 different zones based on the criteria that was set. These are the areas where it needs to be used for conservation, sustainable use, or multiple use, or for buffer zone, so that we can do that. Now we can also use this for understanding the migration of sand and how it changes the mangrove cover. Here you see that in this the white part here is the beach, sandy part, and wherever there's a green are there, they are the mangrove cover. So you see that in this image there was not much mangrove cover, but with time, when there was some protection to the mangrove, then the mangrove cover started increasing. This is another image that shows that in another area that you can see that there are some lines in the mangroves area. So these lines are not natural. This suggests that there is plantation going on, plantation of mangroves are going on. Ideally, see, this is the land part. This is towards we go this side, it will land, and then this side is the sea part. So ideally, the mangroves grow in low energy environment, and something which is in front of beaches, they are not actually the low energy environment. So ideally, naturally, these are the areas that behind the beaches are the area which is most suitable for mangrove plants to grow to grow them. But here, because of the protection of the plantation of mangroves, they have grown in the areas that is not naturally suitable uh, for them. So we also need to identify properly the area which is most suitable based on different parameters, including the landform, including many other parameters, which is best suitable for that. So then we should be identifying the sites that is suitable for planting any kind of plants. Uh, if this is planted here, then there will be some change in the coral reef also that could be expected, because we know that we discussed the other day that they are the land builders. So as there will be more and more plants will be there, they will uh, deposit more of sediments, and then it will keep on increasing. So then that will affect the coral reef areas. This is another example of coral reef. In the previous image I showed, it was in Gulf of Kutch. This is in the Gulf of Mannar. When you see that this is the island, the red one is showing the island. It has the underwater features. This is basically coral reef. And you see that there are some areas where it shows some grayish or some darkish color. So to understand at times the features, the processes which are going on here, we need to understand the area or the sources of this. So when we went for the field work here, we found that there are some turbidity and there are some sedimentation going on, because we couldn't find here that what could be the source of the sediment, where the sediments are coming and depositing. So in that case, we needed to study a larger area, and we found that uh, for that, this is the area. Then we started to study a larger image that covered a bigger area. Then we found that this source of this silt here is coming somewhere from here. You can see some stretches here. So there is some area from where the water is moving, and it is bringing some sediments along with it, and that is getting deposited in that area. So this is an example of how sometimes to understand the local process, a local phenomena, we need to understand the larger areas also. This is another image from the Gulf of Kutch, wherein it shows this is the coral reef, and these are the areas in the eastern part, wherein you will see the bright features. That bright feature is nothing but mud deposition. The mud, when it gets dried during low tide, because of the salt content, there will be much of reflection in the mud. So now you see that mud deposition you can see only in the eastern part in this reef, and to some extent in other area. So then we want to study this, and then we saw that what is the flow of the water here, how the sediments are, how the water is bringing sediments, and from where and how it is getting deposited. So that is how we found that this is the low energy environment where the sediments, the brought by the currents, by the water, that is getting deposited in that. And the area which are normally here, you can see the edges here. There are a lot of currents in the sea. So there is not much of sediment deposition here. So this is if you take a bigger picture, the image which I showed in last slide, that is actually this area which was there. And now to understand that, we needed to study the entire Gulf area and also the part of Arabian Sea. So in that, when we study that, we found that there are a lot of sediments which are being brought by the Indus River, and that is through the process of tide, and this sediments are being pushed into the Gulf of Kutch, and then irrespective of whatever the tidal condition is, whether it is low tide, high tide, whatever tide condition is, there is a continuous pushing of the sediments into the Gulf, and that is getting deposited in the Gulf in different parts. This is what. So here also, through the OCM data, ocean thermometer data, we could quantify the sediment concentration in this. This is the range that has been found in that through the data. This is a field photograph. Now we were talking about the coral reef, so this is important that when there is a lot of sediments, the sediment will get deposited on the corals, and that will block and then the corals will die afterwards because they will not be able to breathe. Another example is the topography of the mudflat and the pattern of the hydrological networks that is could be studied best using remote sensing, because this is a muddy area and physical survey is difficult to carry out because the muddy area one gets struck. So that is how it is very important. For this data is very much useful for studying those features. This is a land surface temperature map that's been generated for some area, and this shows how with time this is increasing, and that there are many areas in the latest image that gives a higher temperature. So that gives an idea about the 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 concrete, how much has been compression has been taken place in those areas. Then again, the groundwater prospecting, I showed one example here. This is another image of another area wherein you can see that this was shared by Dr. Shivakumar, me, and in that project, the groundwater prospecting maps were prepared, and also it was suggested that which are the areas where artificial research structure can be constructed. So this was a part of national project, Rajiv Gandhi National Drinking Water Mission project. Under that project, this map was prepared, and that project aimed to identify areas where the habitations, rural habitations, wherever there is no source of drinking water, then probably a tube well or something can be dug so that the population can find the potable water. So this is another for drinking water supply purpose. That was the purpose. This is another example wherein that exactly is not landform, but landform is one of the input for coming to this. So this is under the hazards. So natural hazards is under that it is there. So there were many thematic maps that are again prepared for this. Again, this is an output I'm showing from the CDAC work. So different kinds of data were used to map the land use, land cover, and the geological structures, and soil types, and rock types, etc. And those were combined, giving some weightages based on what we know that is the relationship between those features to trigger a landslide. So this is how the risk, the donation, and the risk assessment were carried out. And this gives you an idea about the areas which are very susceptible for landslide, and also the risk susceptible areas. This is a map of Arunachal Pradesh. Flood is another common occurrence in India, wherein particularly in Bihar and many parts like in northeast in Brahmaputra River, Assam in particularly. So this again, this software system was prepared by CDAC, and this talks about the development of open source based tool for delineation of flood water using microdata. And this is one thing, and the second thing was to put everything into information system that we call it RS-GIS, near real-time flood monitoring system. So that they use it now. And another example for again Northeast was the spatial distance support system for forest management. Now here this the version they called was Aranya, and this was that they prepared the village development plan, and that was used for joint forest management. And it also does the habitat stability analysis for different purposes. There are different modules to that software, and areas which were encroached during the time of the data which they prepared, that could be identified using this, and also it is useful for forest time analysis. So these are just some examples of how it could be utilized. Another example is how this geology and the ecology things can be combined, and we can understand how these two are related, or what is the relationship between the geoecology and the forest landscape. So there were different parameters like the slope, aspect, elevation, annual temperature, mean annual rainfall, etc. They were studied in relation to the forest canopy cover, So this was found that in certain aspects there are higher vegetation cover, higher forest cover. So similarly, for different parameters, the correlation coefficient were found. This is again by Amitkumar. He has this was published in Water Resources Management Journal, and in that using the revised universal soil loss equation, the rates of soil erosion were estimated again for the the Bonner watershed river, Bonner river watershed in the Kangra, Himachal Himalaya. And based on that, again, we can do the geological status assessment. That is nothing but the finding out overall status of watersheds to indicate ecosystem status and conditions, and that helps in prioritizing sites for conservation or restoration on many other purposes. So this is how, based on different parameters, this watershed was categorized into 4 different zones that needed very high action to the minimum action. So that is the output of that, and then again another output is that by him is he prepared an information system for this area that was called as geo-ecological information system. That there are number of parameters. You can see there are number of maps that could be extracted, and this is particularly useful for the planners who want to do the management planning for that area. So this is how, so whatever data was generated, these are all put under this, and then using some query, one can extract different kinds of thematic maps and the combination of that. So this is in gist about that. Now we have come to the last part of this. Now I'll be discussing about the climate change part that we have not yet covered particularly. Here, remote sensing has provided major advances in understanding the climate system and its changes by quantifying the processes that occurs or that is occurring, and also the spatio-temporal changes in terms of different parameters related to atmosphere, land, and ocean. So the major breakthrough, as suggested by Yang et al. In 2013, is that remote sensing is particularly useful for understanding. It has helped in understanding the warming characteristics of Earth's atmosphere and ocean surfaces, and trends of acceleration in Arctic sea ice loss, and role of distance aerosol sources in genesis of hurricane. So there are 3 major areas where the remote sensing has been found to have particularly contributed in the climate change related studies. And then there are a number of parameters, different climatic variables that can be extracted using different data sources that I mentioned here. It is also from one of the units of PG certificate in climate change. So there are a number of parameters that could be extracted from different. So in that, I'm not showing here, but in that unit there are a list of data that is available, and from where also one can download those data that is given there. So with this, I conclude my session here. Now the session is open for the question answer if there is any. So if there is any question that is missed by me, or if you forgot to ask, or if there's some question that you want to ask later, you can write to me at my email address. I will try to address to your